Hello, scholars. I apologize for my absence today, and if you could please start this new unit of study in your notes and set aside any questions you'll have for Wednesday, and we can hopefully go over it together. This is a double chapter, chapter 21 and 22. Kind of complicated, but it seemed like a lot of you remember this from sophomore year, so hopefully we can get this through together. So let's go ahead and get started. First, some textbooks, some historians refer to this as the age of Metternich. If you can't recall who Metternich is, he is the foreign minister of Austria. And this is a period of a lot of changes, intellectual changes, economic changes, political changes throughout all of Europe following the disaster of Napoleon Bonaparte. A lot of things are going to change, and so that's what we're going to go into. And we're going to start with 1814. This is the year before the Congress of Vienna, where you have the quadruple alliance between Russia, Prussia, Austria, Great Britain. I have your leaders of those countries here, and they were called the Big Four. Eventually, they'll take on the title of Concert of Europe. If you had me as a sophomore, I described this as the Mean Girls, the Plastics of Europe, in that these leaders were dictating everything that was going on in Europe, just like the Mean Girls in the movie The Mean Girls. I also have here just kind of a brief background in what's going on in all of these countries. Russia, the Decembrist uprising in 1825. I know this is 10 years after, but just kind of have an idea. Just some specifics. I know we tend to go a little more vague, but I want you to know what's going on. Basically, we still have the Romanovs in Russia. There's a power struggle after with the who's going to be the next throne of Russia. Nicholas I becomes Europe's first reactionary monarch. Basically, going back to traditional czarist ways of ruling in Russia. In Prussia, the Junkers, if you remember, these are the landholders, the wealthy, and this is the Hohenzollerns. This is the very wealthy family that is dictating much of what's going on in Prussia. Eventually, what's going to happen is we will have the appointment of Otto von Bismarck into Prussia, and with his very shrewd, manipulative policies, he will lead Prussia to the unification of Germany. That's coming end of this week, next week. Austria still technically is part of the German Confederation. If you've forgotten, Napoleon Bonaparte actually dismantled the Holy Roman Empire, so we no longer have the Holy Roman Empire. What we have is the German Confederation. What the German Confederation is 38 German states. Prussia is one, Austria is one, there's 36 others. Eventually this week, we're going to get into the unification of those German states into what we call Germany. Britain, we have talked about last week with the Industrial Revolution. Since Britain didn't have to rebuild or do anything after Napoleon, basically what's going on, they're very stable, and the only issues they have are government. Who's in charge, who's not in charge. The conservative Tories are in charge. The Whigs is the other political party. I don't know if you remember that. The Corn Laws, basically this is a tariff that is passed to get British to only buy British corn. Although that may sound lovely, the problem is that this is only benefiting the landowners because they can jack up the prices to like right below what the tariff price is. So the poor really have no choice. They have to buy the extremely expensive wealthy corn. It's making them richer. Anyway, what is the result is the Peterloo Massacre in 1819. A couple thousand died, and then eventually, I have up here, but please note, it looks like there's a move to repression in Britain, a more conservative, authoritarian rule. It won't. It's still going to remain a constitutional monarchy with Parliament having a very big role in decisions being made in England. So moving into 1815, Congress of Vienna, very important. Basically, it's supposed to be a couple meetings. It actually ends up being like 8 months of meetings. And I'm going to jump all the way down here. I have down here the Dancing Congress, and the reason I put that here is because They got a lot of slack because it was supposed to, again, like I said, it was only supposed to be 1 or 2 meetings. It ends up being 8 meetings, 8 months of meetings, sorry. And, balls and banquets and caricatures were being drawn about the leaders, drinking and partying. So really did not get a lot of respect. However, it is, I'm going to argue, it's a temporary triumph for the old conservative order because I'm going to argue from 1815 to about 1850, they are successful. The concert of Europe, our big four, are very successful in keeping the status quo. And what is the status quo? Well, let's talk about it. Here we have conservatism, keeping the tradition, going back to the way it was, maintaining the balance of power. France was reestablished. France will eventually make its way up into the concert of Europe, so they'll eventually be 5. How did they do that? Well, they surrounded France by building up the borders, by building up countries that touched France to kind of keep their eye on France. The Carlsbad decrees, I kind of already mentioned this before, but with this balance of power, they didn't want to unify Germany. They didn't want to unify Italy. So they had Italy, which was about 9 Italian states. Germany was about 38 German states, keeping the status quo. Leniency towards France. Like I said, France is going to move its way up to the big 5. Being okay with France, not totally destroying France, kind of foreshadowing up to after World War I, much like the Treaty of Versailles did to Germany. It's too bad they didn't look back to this little snippet of history. The legitimate power, giving the European thrones back to the legitimate power. So, for example, in Spain, Napoleon Bonaparte put his brother as the king of Spain. He was taken out of power. The legitimate person was put back in Spain. Same with France. The legitimate ruler was Louis XVI's brother. Louis XVIII became the leader of France, the king of France. He will remain the king of France for 10 years. Principle of intervention. Basically, the principle of intervention is that the concert of Europe, if they don't like what the rest of Europe is doing, they have the thumbs up that they can invade and put down whatever's going on. So, for example, this week we're going to talk about Italy is going to start to attempt to unify. Germany is going to start to attempt to unify. With the principle of intervention, the concert of Europe can go in and put down these unification attempts. Compensation. Basically giving money back to money, territory, etc., to anyone who helped bring down Napoleon Bonaparte. I gave you a list right here just to kind of show you how this compensation worked. You could take a look at that, add that into your notes. So this is basically a very conservative, I'm going to argue quasi, kind of sort of, successful for the time being. I kind of want to just take a step back. I know Latin America isn't entirely European history, but still I think it has a lot to do with European history. How did the ideas of the Enlightenment inspire the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and the Haitian Revolution? I think you could probably answer that in your notes. If you can't, highlight it. We'll talk about it on Wednesday. Latin America, go back to the Age of Exploration. You had the conquistadors, the Spanish conquistadors conquering most of South America, setting up encomienda, forcing Catholicism, forcing the Spanish language on their conquest, bringing diseases, killing off many, and of course, particularly in Brazil and in the Caribbean, bringing in African slaves. So how did Latin America look in the 1800s? Well, I'll tell you. Latin America's society was divided. Spanish and Portuguese crown, Catholic Church, patriarchy. Number 1, South America was divided. You either were part of the Spanish crown or Portuguese crown. If you're Brazil, you're part of the Portuguese crown. Number 2, all of South America was under the Catholic Church. This was also hierarchical in and of itself. Number 3, patriarchy. We're talking old school patriarchy. Like if you were, well, for all girls, you were either owned by your husband or your dad. I give you one little fun fact right here. This is a woman. That's actually a shortened version of her name. She was a child prodigy. She had taught herself 5 languages by the time she was a very, very young girl. She was an extremely published author. She eventually, under much scrutiny from other men, she sold over 4,000 of her own books. And one of her my favorite quotes of hers is, Aristotle would have written more if he did more cooking. I don't know. I find that kind of clever. On top of this division, there was also division in society. You had the Peninsulars, the Creoles, the natives, the mestizos, and the mulattoes. The Peninsulars, the way I think of it, is they come directly from the peninsula. either Spain or Portugal, tippy top of the food chain. They were making all the decisions. The Creoles, they are descendants from the Peninsulars, but they're kind of like second-class citizens. Natives, mestizos, mulattoes, bottom of the food chain. So what's going to happen? Well, when Bonaparte took over, think of the expression, when the cat's away, the mice will play. Spain and Portugal basically become so obsessed with what's happening with Bonaparte that there's room for rebellion. Think of Spain and Portugal being the cat. When the cat's away, the mice, the South Americans, push for independence. Let's start with South America. When Bonaparte was in Spain, there was guerrilla warfare. There was the Spanish were doing everything they could to get Bonaparte out. In South America, this gave the opportunity to start a rebellion. Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín, we call them the liberators of South America. Both Creoles, both highly educated men, both started the movement to get South America independent. You know, I mean, I'm a European history person, but I'd argue that South America, you know, started this whole concept of really solidifying this concept of the nation state with these two gentlemen breaking away from South America. It's kind of a cool concept. Let's go to Portugal. When Bonaparte took over Portugal, the Portuguese king actually moved to Brazil. Naturally, he loved it. I can't speak from experience, but Brazil looks pretty sweet. He loved it. He didn't want to move back. Eventually, the Portuguese were like, dude, you're coming back. He moved back in 1821, but his son stayed. His son got along very well with the landowners, the plantation owners, and they eventually asked him to be their legit king. He became king of Brazil. And one little side note I want to add about this is that this was a very cushy relationship between him and the plantation owners. Brazil was one of the last countries in the Western world to give up slavery, and I'd argue that that goes back to this relationship with who's making the rules in Brazil. American presidents, I just want to throw out there this Monroe Doctrine, 1823. If you're looking at your dates where we are, things are a mess in Europe. We're about to get into that, but 1823, what is President Monroe stating? Is he's basically saying to Europe, stay away from South America. These are our brothers. We will protect them. I'd argue that this is maybe America, you know, flexing its muscles, making its way. I wouldn't say we're stating our hegemonic power, but we're eventually getting there. Really, you know, protecting our friends in the South. If you had me as a sophomore, you opted a lot of political cartoons, including this one over here. Take a moment right now and take a look at it. I'm going to upload one more series of notes for you to put into your notes. All right, see you soon.